Hello and welcome, lords and ladies of the YouTubes, to this video with me, GreyHunter, and joining me today is...
Hello, my name is Arch, and we will have a quick discussion about the various books of the Warhammer universe, because, well, we've both received several requests, and our schedules finally allowed us to actually get this little conversation up, so I hope you'll enjoy it.
I'm sorry, I'm a colonial. I'm sorry. So today we're going to be talking about the Black Library, which is Games Workshop's publishing arm. They produce books for the lore and all that other good stuff. So, where should we begin this introduction, Arch? Where do you think we should begin introducing the masses?
Well, I figured we'd just quickly introduce them to the site itself. It is, well, as GreyHunter so wonderfully and eloquently said, it is run by Games Workshop, and it is where they keep pretty much all of their lore-related books and novels, though, mind you, not army books. This is purely fictional stuff, so to say.
I believe the name actually comes from the lore, doesn't it? The Black Library is like the repository of knowledge.
It is.
For the Eldar or something like that?
It is for the 40k.
See, we're crossing the streams, guys. We're crossing the universes. Don't let them touch.
And we had most of you probably want just a basic starting point, so we had a few recommendations. I'll go ahead with mine first, if I am so allowed.
Go forth, sir. Explain to them how good your series is.
Well, the one I figured I'd recommend was Gotrek and Felix by William King originally, and then further on several various authors, and it has grown into quite a long series at this point, with some pretty damn good books. They're relatively light on the lore elements, so you require no previous knowledge of the Warhammer universe to enjoy these books, and they're very easy to read. They are very action-packed and very eventful. There's not a whole lot of complicated lore-related materials to trip you up.
They sound like page-turners.
They are quite wonderful.
How many books are in the series? I don't know.
There would be about 14 or 15 at this point.
Fair number?
Yes.
That's a lot. They've survived all these adventures. I find that hard to believe. Felix is just a guy, isn't he? And Gotrek is a slayer?
Gotrek is a dwarf slayer, which means he's gone out to find himself an honorable death, but being a dwarf, of course, he can't do anything halfway, and so he can't just allow himself to be killed. And Felix, while just a normal guy, he is accompanied by Gotrek, who is by no means a normal dwarf due to the magical properties of his big-ass axe.
It occurs to me that perhaps Gotrek is shit at his job, because, he's survived 14 books.
There is, in fact, a little part of the book that claims that Gotrek is the most successful and the most famous slayer of his age, and he is also considered by his fellow dwarfs to be the worst slayer ever.
That's interesting. For once, not dying gloriously in battle is failing.
Indeed.
Interesting.
And he has been failing for quite a while after this point.
You're doing a bad job, Gotrek. Go sit in the corner, think about what you've done. So, where do their adventures take place? Where have they gone? Have they gone everywhere?
They've gone across most of the Warhammer world at this point. They've been in the frozen north of the Chaos Wastes. They've been in the dwarfish homelands of the mountains, and they have had several soirees into the Empires and the Southlands.
Well, that's actually a really good thing. It sounds like a really nice sort of basic primer to get people initiated with the Warhammer world at large. Good pick.
It does it in a very simplistic and yet introductory way. It doesn't overload you with information. It tells you, okay, this is the Empire, here we have this currency, and it does it all within the story by explaining I paid for my drinks at the tavern, for example, with golden crowns. Lots of nice lore information without requiring the previous information.
That's good. A lot of books, I find, when they're done for a licensed franchise, expect only the people who actually have knowledge of the franchise will enjoy the books or even read them. So that's nice that it's not completely overloading you.
I believe Gotrek and Felix was probably created with exactly the goal of introducing people to the universe, because, well, it's a human hero that's telling a human story about someone else. you see the story through the eyes of Felix Jaeger, essentially. You never get to see Gotrek's direct perspective of things. This is Felix Jaeger telling you a story about his adventures with the crazy dwarf Gotrek.
The crazy dwarf who wants to die.
But, moving onwards just a little bit, GreyHunter, I seem to have understood that you have a few recommendations of your own.
I do. For the Warhammer Fantasy universe in particular, because, that's what people have been asking us about. Although, they should totally check out the Horus Heresy and the Warhammer 40,000 lines as well, because the Black Library writes about all of Games Workshop's franchises, and those are amazing. But, for Warhammer Fantasy, the series I picked is a sub-series of a series, actually, because it's in the Time of Legends series, which is about basically famous people from the Warhammer Fantasy world who did really big things. These people are, they're legends. So the series I picked is the Nagash series, because people have gone, hey, who's that guy you're always talking about? This is that guy I'm always talking about. And the Nagash series is written by a guy called Mike Lee, and he is really, really good. Actually, he's really fantastic at writing. And the series basically focuses on a time that was well before the current timeline, if you will. It is nowhere close to the end times, though the events described do carry over to the end times. It follows the story of Nagash, who is a priest in the ancient realm of Nehekara, and he's a little bit miffed that he's not going to ever be king. It's kind of a classic story about the shunned son, if you will, and he naturally wants to claim the throne, and he gets a little bit distracted when some captives are brought over as a kind of present for his brother the king, who has just been crowned, and turns out they're Dark Elves, and they teach him how to be a necromancer, and from there everything just kind of goes downhill. It's not a fun world. So he goes from being a priest who's, perhaps not likable, he's understandably annoyed that he's never going to be able to hold power, into something that it's not even close to being alive. By the end of the series, Nagash is a spirit that inhabits the corporeal realm and wants to kill everything. Everything. So, fun story.
And that's also a pretty good introductionary point, isn't it? Because it's so far ahead of the current timeline that, pretty much none of the current existing lore exists, and so naturally you don't actually need to know any about it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting starting point. It actually is the starting point that I took when I started reading Black Library stuff about Warhammer Fantasy, and even though I had a passing knowledge, I say passing knowledge, pretty extensive knowledge of the Warhammer Fantasy world, it didn't really rely on you having any of that. It was like, the closest it came to was the front page where it says about it being a time of legends, and it gives you a basic rundown of, who Nagash is. In the sense that he's from this place called Nehekara, his dad just died, his brother has been installed as king, this place will eventually be a graveyard. Read on.
A nice basic introduction that sets the story, and of course there will always be a few foreign names, etc., foreign place names, but I assume those are mostly explained during the course of the story?
Yeah, the story comes into contact with, say, the lizard men, the men of the area that will eventually become the Empire. But it doesn't bombard you with knowledge. It's like, these guys are slightly different. These guys are living lizards. Well, of course they're alive. They're lizards that walk around like men. But it doesn't bombard you. It doesn't go, these are the lizard men. By the way, this is their culture. This is their history. This is what they do. It's just like, they exist. Do you want to know more? You should probably go find some other books about it. It's an interesting prospect to go find those other books, so I think it's a good starting point for people interested in the Warhammer Fantasy world. Certainly.
And we just so happen to know a couple of places where you might actually find a few lore videos every now and then.
Do we? I'm struggling to think what you might.
It is a rather obscure little part of the YouTube, but I think some of the people watching might have a rough idea.
Possibly. Self-referential humor, everybody!
Additionally, why don't we make a couple quick suggestions when it comes to 40k? Because the vast majority of you watching probably are interested purely because of Total War Warhammer, the presumed upcoming Total War game. But I would recommend Warhammer 40k on its own merit because it is quite a wonderful universe. And in specific...
40k is perhaps more approachable than Warhammer Fantasy as well.
Yes.
But both settings have an amazing amount of lore, an amazing amount of interest to draw you in. So I think perhaps talking about 40k wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. Let's do that. Let's talk about 40k. Let's make them understand how good 40k can be. Do you have any recommendations, Arch?
Well, the first and, of course, most obvious recommendation is their biggest and most popular book series yet, the Horus Heresy. And
It's a good series.
Indeed it is. I would particularly recommend the first 3 books because they are an excellent introductory start point. It begins by explaining exactly what is happening. It begins explaining who the Emperor is, what the Space Marines are, what the Primarchs are, and it does it in a very simplistic way that is folded into the story. They don't just go like, this is a Primarch, he's this and this tall, he has these and these powers. It informs you about what a Primarch and what an Astartes is via the story. Via firefights, actions, intrigue, and drama, and all of those wonderful things you'd like to see in a novel.
They're also written by different authors, it should be pointed out. So the first 3 books are not written by the same guy. The Horus Heresy series is kind of a tag team thing, where almost every author for the Black Library has written a book, or a short story for it. In particular, the first one, which I believe is False Gods? I can't remember. But it's written by Dan Abnett, and it is amazing. You should totally grab it.
In general,
it will rock your world.
Good authors. Dan Abnett, Graham McNeil. Both of these, very good people. And
Aaron Dembski-Bowden.
Indeed.
Amazing.
So, in particular, if you've read the first 3 books, and you're a little bit confused about the timeline, there is a Wikipedia page. Just Google Horus Heresy, because some of the continuation can be a little bit wonky, as it is written by several different authors on a very pretty long timeline covering an absolute ton of different viewpoints.
That's true. Some of the books don't take place in chronological order, because they are obviously written by different people, and those different people have commitments to their time that they may not have been able to complete a book, so it slots in nice and chronologically. And some books take place before the events of the Horus Heresy itself, so they have to go back in time a little bit. But it's definitely a good recommendation. It's a very solid series. There's a few weak points when you get to books that they don't really cover all that much in the sense of progression, because at that point, I don't think the Black Library quite knew where they wanted to go with progression, which is unfortunate, because all the books are written by very good authors.
Certainly. The Horus Heresy series seems to be a series that was originally designed to be the first 3 books, and then it became, extremely popular, and for good reasons, which left Games Workshop somewhat struggling to actually cover all of their bases as they launched into a rather epic series that is... they've released about 30-plus books now, and by their best reckoning, they're about halfway done, so yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit of a series. Just a tiny bit. But a good recommendation. Are there any other books apart from the first 3 that you would recommend in particular?
In particular...
There's a fair few standalone.
I believe I would have to recommend 1,000 Suns by Graham McNeil, I do believe.
Which one was that again? Oh, yes.
Yes.
That's a very good one. That's about the 1,000 Suns. Surprise, surprise from the title. Very good book. Very good book.
It is one of the fatter books, so...
He does like to write.
In general, a lot of the books on the Black Library can be somewhat pricey, but they're often available in ebook varieties if you're the type who actually likes ebooks, which are considerably cheaper. And there's also a fair few up on Amazon for secondhand if you're strapped for cash. It's not too hard to get a hold of a reasonably priced example.
Definitely, definitely. And they're worth getting a hold of. They're very, very good books, very well written, as we said. Do you have any other recommendations from the Warhammer Fantasy or 40k universes?
I think my next recommendation is one I'm just going to pass straight over to you, being Ciaphas Cain.
Ah, Ciaphas Cain. Ciaphas Cain is that's my love. It's amazing. So the Ciaphas Cain series is written by a guy called Sandy Mitchell. And imagine Blackadder in space, pretty much. This guy, Ciaphas Cain, is a commissar, which, for those of you familiar with the Soviet Union's history at all, and perhaps Enemy at the Gates in particular, would realize is a political guy. He's supposed to urge the troops on, make them go do what they're meant to do, die gloriously for the Emperor. Except Ciaphas Cain is a little bit... He's not a coward so much as he's very self-preserving. And so he is most definitely not the Commissar's Commissar. Which is good, because the series gains a lot from not being so serious. The 40k universe's tagline is, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Arch, I believe, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.
I believe that is correct, yes.
So, the appeal of a series that doesn't take itself completely seriously and can allow for humor in a universe that's supposed to be so grim, dark, and foreboding is amazing. There are, I think there's 8 books now, and they're all written from a first-person perspective, which is a little bit different. Only a few series from the Black Library actually bothered to do this. Another one is by Dan Abnett called Eisenhorn. You should totally check it out. But there are annotations from other characters that he meets, but we can't say who they are because that will spoil. For those of you who actually go and think, perhaps this is a series I should check out. But it is very, very good. It's a mix of Blackadder and Flashman in space, combined with some good old go-get-'em combat. And it's really good. There's a lot of page-turning inducement there, and there's a lot of humor, which you kind of have to think about sometimes to get it, but it's worth reading. It's very, very good.
I think one of the main advantages of the Ciaphas Cain series is the simple fact that in a universe that is so chronically short on kittens and rainbows, as the 40k universe most definitively is, Ciaphas Cain manages to do humor, and he manages to do humor well in a way that still matches with the 40k universe, which is quite an achievement.
This is true. He's a very dynamic character, is Ciaphas Cain. Very dynamic character indeed. And pretty much the whole cast of the series, except for characters that are obviously meant to be poking fun at the general stereotypes that are in the 40k universe, are dynamic and interesting. And you generally grow to love them in the sense that you wouldn't mind seeing spin-offs focused on them. They're very well fleshed out characters. And I enjoy that series a lot. Very highly recommended. If I had to pick a single book in the series, and you can generally pick them up standalone, because the stories are all written from the first-person perspective of Ciaphas Cain, and they're written in the sense that they're his memoirs. So you can pick up any book in the series and not really have to have knowledge of the previous ones. If I had to recommend a particular book, I would probably go for Cain's Last Stand, which is not actually his last stand, but it's a very, very well-written book.
Because Cain has a bit of a talent for getting out of trouble.
Yes. I believe in possibly the 4th book, there is a point where one character says, generally people only get one last stand, Ciaphas. Not so. Is there anything else I would recommend? Yes, actually, there is. I would also recommend the Night Lords series by Aaron Dembski-Bowden. I think it's just going to be a trilogy. He mentioned the possibility of doing a 4th book, but it's a trilogy written, again, I believe, mostly from the first-person perspective. There's a few third-person bits in it, but mostly it's in the first person, and it follows a group of guys called Night Lords. And Night Lords, they're basically Chaos Space Marines, so think Chaos of Warhammer Fantasy, and you're not far off, except these guys have big-ass guns, big-ass sets of armor, and the gods speak to them in their sleep. It's an interesting series, because for a lot of the background, Space Marines are just kind of seen as robots, really, because they are genetically bred to be warriors, first and foremost. And it's nice in this series that they're not. They're obviously people. And you get to look at some snapshots of their lives before they became Space Marines, and it's a good window into the Warhammer 40k world. I quite like them. And Aaron Dembski-Bowden writes amazingly, so that's a top pick. Do you have any other recommendations yourself, Arch?
I think, lastly, I'd like to just mention the quick reads sections of the Black Library, which is a recent discovery, personally.
So recent, I didn't know of it.
It has, it's essentially a collection of short stories set in the various universes in 40k, in Warhammer, and in the Horus Heresy. They're short stories, and because of it, they're very cheap. So if you're having questions whether this could be anything for you, I highly recommend taking a look there, looking up the little book descriptions or book short stories descriptions, and maybe picking up something by the more interesting authors like Graham McNeil, Dan Abnett, etc., and buying one of those just to see if you're interested, because they are usually 1 to 3 euros, so they're considerably cheaper than a full book.
Solid. Games Workshop and the Black Library do have a tendency to overprice things, not that we're bitter about that or anything.
Of course not.
Nope. I think that's a good little snapshot into the world of Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40k, and the Horus Heresy. The Horus Heresy, just as a side note, is not current with the timeline of Warhammer 40k. It takes place 10,000 years before, so it's more kind of a Warhammer 30k, if that makes sense. But definitely worth checking out, nonetheless. If you're interested in the modern time setting of the Warhammer 40k world, probably look more towards stuff like the Night Lords and the Gaunt's Ghost series, which you can find on the Black Library website.
Gaunt's Ghost is indeed an excellent series.
Yes, it is. Excellent author Dan Abnett is. So I think that about wraps up what we were going to talk about, does it not, Arch?
I think we could do a lot worse, certainly, and I think we've touched upon most of the major important subjects, so I'm happy.
Considering how much more we could talk about all of these things, I think we've been quite restrained, myself.
Yes, you do not want to get us started on a proper large-scale subject, because that would be an endless video.
That's true. But, on that note, if there are any particular sort of things that you would like to look at in particular, like if you wanted to know more about the Ultramarines in 40k, or more about the Grey Knights, other such things, drop a comment below saying what you would actually like to know more about for recommendations, and Arch or I will get back to you and be like, hey, you should totally read this.
Yep.
So do it.
If there's any book you're kind of interested in, if you're looking at a book, you think it might be interesting, but you're not quite sure if you want to put the money down, again, just drop us a line. If we've read it, we'll give you a quick summary, and we'll try to help you out.
If you would like to know more, we are here.
Watching. Waiting.
Well, that's a little bit creepy, isn't it?
Details.
I think that's a little bit creepy. On that note, I think we should probably leave before you get more creepy, Arch.
That might be an idea before I really start creeping.
Alright, well, this has been GreyHunter and
Arch.
And we have been talking to you for far too long. I'm sure you're all bored. Adios.